BI is really strong at. In fact, this ETL inside of Power BI capabilities gives us our self-service capabilities that we strive for in this modern day, to where anyone, whether you're IT, you're in finance, you're in marketing, having these self-service ETL abilities it changes the game. It's actually why a lot of companies are moving to Power BI, just because of the capabilities we have in this process. But before we dig into it too much further, give you guys a little bit of introduction about me. I don't know if any of you have ever attended one of my webinars before, seen me on YouTube, checked out my blog, but if you haven't met me before or seen me before or checked out my stuff, I'm a big time nerd. I love video games. I love Dungeons and Dragons. I love data analytics. It's actually kind of one of the reasons why the reason I got into this field is because I build reports for fun. And, when I started this, like some of the stuff that I built before becoming a consultant at Power BI, or consultant at Pragmatic Works, was I was building reports for World of Warcraft to figure out what's the best team composition we can use to beat these dungeons the most efficient way possible. I built some Dungeons and Dragons dice rolling probability trackers. So like, all right, what kind of dice should I use? Do I use a 20-sided die or 2 6-sided die or whatever it may be? Probability tracker I made as a report as well. So yeah, I'm a big time nerd. I'm also a technical editor of books. If you've seen any of Pragmatic Works books, you might have seen my name in there as a technical editor. The technical editor I'm not an author per se, but I, either come up with examples in labs or I proof the labs and make sure they all work properly. I also do a lot of presenting. I present locally here in Jacksonville often. A lot of times at the local Power BI user group in Jacksonville, Florida, or the Jacksonville SQL Server user group, namely SQL Saturday. I've presented at several SQL Saturdays now. You can also check out my blog. My blog is backtosql.wordpress.com. Check it out there. I have some pretty cool Power BI stuff. I mainly delve into Power BI. It's my favorite thing, so I spend a lot of my focus on it in business and personally. My Twitter is @backtosql. There, I tweet several times per day. You're going to see more than just Power BI stuff on my SQL. I actually tweet a lot about anything in like the Microsoft BI stack or Azure related things. Also, my email is inley@pragmaticworks.com. Please feel free to send me an email if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you want to talk nerd, whatever you want to do. Please feel free to email me at inley@pragmaticworks.com. I'm always available. All right, so let's get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty now that we're done with this. So ETL, if you're not sure what ETL is, it means extract, transform, and load. It's kind of a buzzword. It's kind of a buzzword because the ETL process nowadays is not always those three things together at the same time. It's kind of like I said, it's a process, all right? ETL is getting our data from its source and putting it in a report and making it usable in that report. So extract as in pull the data from the data source. Transform as in apply any business rules that we need to that data. Load that data to where it's consumable at a report level and you can actually start building on it. Okay, that's the layman's term of putting the ETL process. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of start from scratch. We're going to do our ETL within Power BI. We're going to do it all right there. If any of you have ever, used like a cube before or something like that, if it makes more sense, you can kind of build your own little cube inside of Power BI. It's pretty awesome. Okay, so what I mean by what a cube is, it's a multi-dimensional type model. Would you have multiple dimensions and you have a fact? So a fact and a dimension. Also, you might have heard the term star schema. You might have heard the term Kimball method. Potentially you've heard of something like Snowflake, something like that. We could do all of these processes together inside Power BI at once. Okay, so let's start off by doing something simple. Let's open up Power BI. So here, as you can see, I have a fresh Power BI open. What version is this? I just want to make sure, because I'm working from home on a different machine. June 2018. Wow, I thought it looked odd. That is not what we want to use. So let's see what I got. This one. I haven't seen that black background in a long time. So if you didn't know, whenever you install a new version of Power BI, sometimes it overwrites the old version. Sometimes you might just get a different version installed. There we go. This looks more modern. And also, report server is its own thing too. I've been working a lot of report server stuff lately. March 2020 is this version that'll do. So one tip that I have for everyone here, this is unrelated, but since it just came up, whenever you install Power BI Desktop, if you don't have it installed already, the easiest way to install Power BI Desktop is actually directly from the Microsoft Store. So if you look at the Microsoft Store and we search for Power BI Desktop, this is just a good tip I like to give people. Power BI Desktop. If you install it from the store, it actually automatically updates for you to the latest version. Because if you download it from the website, the Power BI website, then you have to manually re-download it every month. So that's just a little tip for you guys. If you download it from the Microsoft Store, it'll keep it up to date. And that's why I had the June one open, because I actually didn't use my store version. I used the wrong one. So there's that. So we have Power BI open. Now, what kind of data we're going to use? We're just going to use some free data that, especially one that Pragmatic Works likes to use a lot. We're going to be focusing on something that's easy that everyone can kind of utilize in this class together. I'll pull it over here on my screen. We're going to be utilizing data.gov. So data.gov is the website that I'm currently on. Let me start my Zoom software. There we go. Data.gov is a simple website. It's a lot of free data about various things about the US, and it's got some pretty cool stuff in here. So we're going to go to data.gov, and I'm actually going to search for failed banks. So if we search for failed banks, there is this data set called the FDIC failed bank list. What this data set is data from, I believe, 2010 to present. Don't quote me on the dates, but it's something like that. 2010 to present, where a bunch of banks that have closed down in the last, however long it's been, and they've been purchased out by other banks, is what this is. So like, not only did the bank close, but it was also purchased by another bank. So if I could download this if I want to. I could hit this download button. You can see it starts as download banklist.csv down here in the bottom left corner. I could load this as an Excel file, but the best thing to do on a website like this, in order to keep it like dynamic and up to date, what I could do is I could go to the download link and hit copy link address, and I have this copy link address. So if I start a new tab and go to that website link, you can see now that it started the download again. So we're going to use this web source. We're going to use that website URL as our data source here. If you're in here, you're probably not like a super beginner, so I'm not going to harp on how to use Power BI. You can always come back and watch this recording if you need to catch up. So I'm going to use a web data source in Power BI and paste this URL. As you can see, this is that banklist.csv URL that we have here. And I'm just going to hit OK. And we're going to load this into Power BI. Excuse me. All right, so we're going to go ahead and see this data looks good, and I'm going to hit this transform data button. So most of this class is we're going to focus on the ETL process is actually in the Power Query editor. Power Query editor uses the language M, not DAX. So if I go to transform data, it's going to load the Power Query editor, and here's kind of what we're looking at. If you've watched a lot of Pragmatic Works stuff, this isn't going to be anything too crazy new for y'all. Okay, so this is the Power Query editor. It has a bunch of our data in it. It has some banks and everything like that. And just to give you guys an idea of the business, like the business rules, what we're kind of doing here in this report is, our idea is, we work for a bank, a big conglomerate bank company, and we're opening up a new brick and mortar bank somewhere in the US, and we want to know where banks are not successful. We already have some reports on, say, banks that are successful. We already have some reports on banks that have the most profit, and so on and so forth. And this is just another one of the reports we're making on banks that are failing. That's kind of like the idea that we're kind of going with here. So I'm going to take this And first I have to make some basic modifications to it. So this is a singular table. This is our first table we're working with, is a singular table. So if I look at this query name on the top left, I'm going to rename it to something that makes a little more sense, and I'm going to call it Dale Banks. All right, that's our query name. And then we got a bunch of data here that we could start manipulating. So one thing I could say right now, things that I don't care about, maybe I don't care about the certification column. So I'm going to remove that column. This doesn't remove from the data source, right? The data source is that Excel file that is on the website. I didn't just remove a column from the website. No, I just removed it here. We're transforming this data. We're applying our own business rules. So I applied a business rule was I don't want that column. So I just right-clicked it and hit delete. Well, maybe I also don't want this acquiring institution. Maybe I don't care about, what bank caused it. I could right-click and hit remove. I could do that as well. Well, now, or if I changed my mind. I do want that column there. I do want the acquiring institution. So first off, some things that you can notice is we could see that the code of things that we've just done were right here. So we removed some columns, we removed the cert column, and we removed the acquiring institution column, right? I could go modify that code up there at the top. I could go into the advanced editor and actually modify the code from right here if I wanted to. But the easiest thing for me on this example, oops, didn't mean to zoom in again, is I could just come to the right side of this applied steps section. What you could do here in this applied step section is you could kind of go back forward in time. You can go forward in time, back in time. You can kind of time skip around and kind of change things as you please. What I'm actually going to do here is there's actually no undo in the query editor. There's no Control Z. There's no undo button. But what you can do is you can hit X if something you on a step that you don't want to do. Oh, I want to bring those columns back that I removed. So now that both those columns are back, and I'm going to remove the cert column. I'm going to keep acquiring institution. All right, there we go. So we got our acquiring institution column back. And what are some other transformations we could do here? So we've already extracted the data that we want from our data.gov, that Excel file that exists. And so we're just applying more transformations here. So some other things I might want to do is, okay, closing date, that's great information. Well, what if I just want a column that have the year in it? There's many ways you could accomplish this. The easiest way for me that I like to do things is you could actually apply transformations to specific columns. So I could go to closing date and hit transform and transform it, into a year, but then I lose my closing date column. So what I could do is maybe I could right click on closing date and hit duplicate column, and this closing date copy, I could take that one, I go to transform, go to year, transform, year, year. So now I just have a year column. All right, so I'm going to rename that column to year. So now I have my own year column. So the next thing is I'm going to give you guys a second here to think about if I wanted to report on this, geographically speaking, I just want you to contemplate this for like 10 to 20 seconds or whatever. Geographically speaking, what issues would I have? Because I can tell you right now, there's a problem. I can tell you right now there's a problem, but I want you to think about what that problem could be from a geographical standpoint. All right, so the problem here is that if I were to report on this at the state level, I should be able to get all my information, right? Well, first off, the state column is using prefixes like NJ, NE, WV, OH. Now, there are some geographical locations in the world other than the United States that use these state abbreviations, these state prefixes. So that is one going to cause us problems you guys are going to see right off the bat. There's another issue as well. Same thing as an ambiguity issue is the state column is ambiguous. The city column is also ambiguous. For instance, I live in Jacksonville, Florida. I know there's at least like 5 or 10 other Jacksonvilles in the United States. If I were looking at just the city level of my report, Jacksonville's going to pop up all over the place, and it's not going to give me proper information. It's not going to know which Jacksonville I'm talking about. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually make a city and a state column. Okay, so the city and state column, what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge these two columns together. So I can click on the city column, I can hold control, I can select the state column. After I do that, I can right click, I can hit merge columns. When I merge these columns together, it asks me what kind of separator I want to do. Well, when we look at city and states together, we do city, comma, space, state. Well, there's a comma and there's a space, but not both. So I'm going to choose custom, do a comma and a space, and I'm going to call this new column city, state. There we go. Now I have this city, state column. But now I just lost my state column by itself. Darn it. Well, it's okay. We're going to fix it. So instead of deleting this step, duplicating, and doing it again, I'm going to show you guys some little time skipping you can do in this transformation process. What you could do is this applied step section on the far right, you use it a lot. It is a very, very awesome section that you could manipulate over here. So if I come over here, notice we're on this merge column step. It's highlighted. If I select the previous step, which is called rename columns in this case, by not clicking the X, just clicking on the rename column, merge column is still there, but the merge hasn't happened yet, as you can see. So what I could do from here is I can right click on the state column and I can hit duplicate column. Ask me if I want to insert a step because I'm not at the latest step. Remember, I want kind of back in time. Do I want to insert a step? Yes, I do. So now I have a duplicated state column. And in my merge column step, the city state column exists. And on the far right, my duplicated state column exists as well. So that's perfect. So I'm going to rename this column to state. There we go. All right, so this data, as of right now, is looking pretty decent, okay? There's more stuff that we could do with this if we wanted to, but as of literally right now, it's fine. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at it real quick. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit close and apply. We're gonna end up loading more data here in just a moment, but we are gonna go with this for right now. So this is applied. I have this failed banks table on the far right in my fields pane with these different columns that we have. And just for the sake of visualizing something here so we kind of see everything that we've done, I'm going to start off with a simple map. So this map, we are going to look at state as our location. And then I'm going to create a measure here. So I'm going to give you guys another little tip here when you're working with your data model. One thing I could do is I could create a measure, but a measure has to be stored in a table. The problem with a measure being stored in a table is that measures don't belong to any table. Measure could be in any table and go anywhere. So if this table was bigger, it had like 30 columns, 40 columns, which is pretty common. You know, if I start creating measures in here, they're going to be scattered about all crazy like. All right. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create a table to just store my measures in. This is a great best practice for all you people out there that are creating reports. Create a table for just your measures. There's many ways you can do this. I'm going to show you guys how I like to do it. So I'm going to go back into this Power Query editor, and you go back into the Power Query editor by hitting the formerly known as Edit Queries. You hit the Transform Data button. And then on the top left, I'm going to go to, where's it at? The Home tab. I'm going to go to Enter Data. So I'm just going to create a table here out of nothing. So when I hit Enter Data, I'm going to just put something in. I'm going to put the number 1. That sounds great to me, and I'm going to hit OK. So what this is going to do is actually going to create a new table with just nothing in it. See, it's called table. Oh, where'd my mouse go? All right, it's called table. It's got one column and it's got a value of 1. It could be anything, it doesn't matter. So I'm going to call this table, double click on it, underscore measures. Now you can't call it just measures because that name is reserved in Power BI, so you got to add something. But if I put an underscore, it's always going to alphabetically put this at the top of my tables list on the far right. So when I hit close and apply, I have another table that exists. Now, a lot of you in Power BI, when you look at your relationships that exist in Power BI, you're like, all right, you have a table, you got to relate them together. But because measures don't belong to any table, they're just their own kind of freestanding thing. We don't need to create a relationship to this measures table. It's going to be by itself over here in the relationship view or the model view. It's going to be by itself. We're just not going to touch it. All right, so now in this measures table, I'm going to create a new measure. All right, so I'm going to right click it, hit new measure. And for each record in my failed banks table, each row in my failed banks table is a bank that has closed. So I'm going to do a count of banks measure. Let me make this a little bigger. So this measure is called count of banks. And all I'm going to do here for this is I'm going to do count rows on the failed banks table. All right, so now I have my count of banks measure that exists. So here's another little tip before I'm gonna actually add this to the visual first. So let's actually look at this in the bubble map. So as you could see earlier, remember I said there's some ambiguity problems. The state of PR, which is Puerto Rico, it's not technically a state, but it's a province or whatever you want to call it, is being located down here somewhere in Brazil. And I think it's Paraguay is what it's picking up, even though we know that PR is supposed to be right here. Is the ambiguity problem. We'll fix that later. All right, so anyways, so let's look at count of banks as our size of our bubble. And now we can see, where all the banks failed the most here in this map. So this little map, it gives us a nice little visual representation. Don't harp on it too much, doesn't matter. We're just using it to kind of visualize our data to see what we've done so far. But now that I have my measures table set up with a measure in it, I'm going to show you guys another tip. So if I look at my data view and go to my measures table, remember this column, the number 1, just doesn't do anything. It's just I made it so I could have a table. But now that I have a measure in my little measures repository down here, over here, I'm going to call it measures repository because that's what I always call it, because it's not a table really, it's just somewhere to keep all our measures. If I go and right click on this column and hit hide in report view, notice the column is grayed out now, that the word's grayed out. Now that in the report view, which is this tab, in the report view, this column won't be seen. So in the report view, now I just have this measures repository only with measures stuff being stored in it. That's it. Okay. So now I have this measures repository just with count of banks measure in it, and any other measure that I create is going to be stored right there. All right. So I have count of banks in there. We're looking at that. All's fine and dandy. Maybe I'll also throw a table in just for a little bit better visual representation. So let's look at, like something like states, and we'll look at count of banks, and let's make this a little bit bigger. We're not focusing on design on this, so we're just validating our code. We always validate everything in visuals, all right? So we could see here, Georgia, followed by Florida, followed by Illinois, and California had the most failed banks. That is pretty accurate with what our map is showing here as well. All right, so now we have this data. All right, so let's work on our model a little bit. So our model is currently one table, this failed banks table. All right, so let's bring in more dimensions. Let's bring in more dimensions and have them all talking to each other. All right, so one thing that's common that you should always include in every Power BI report is a date table. The reason why you always want a date table is because in order to do certain time intelligence functions, as in, all right, how many did this happen for previous year? How many of these things happened between this certain set of dates? Anything kind of like that, that's called time intelligence, you need a date table for it to work properly. The reason why you need a date table is because you have to have a contiguous selection of dates, which means a selection of dates that there's no gaps. There has to be, Jan 1, 2000 to Jan 1, 2000 or 2005. There can't be a single missing date, and a bank might not close down literally every single day of every single year. Hence why we need a date table to perform those things. So there's a bunch of ways you can load date tables here in Power BI. There's a ton of them. You can make one from scratch in M. You can make one from scratch in DAX. You can make one You could import a table from your local, databases that you might have in SQL Server or whatever it may be. But in this case, just so everyone can do it, if you're following along, I am going to go to Devin Knight's blog. He actually has if I look in his blog and if I search for date, he actually has some pretty nice M code, which is, excuse me, creating a date dimension with Power Query. He has a blog about it. So if I load up his blog, and Devin Knight he's actually the director of the training department here at Pragmatic Works. I can actually go in here and I could literally just copy this whole bit of code he has, right click and hit copy. I can go into Power BI. All right. So now I'm going to get data. I'm going to get data and I'm actually going to open up a blank query because I have code that I could copy in here to make a date table. So I'm going to open up the advanced editor for this blank query with nothing in it, and I'm going to paste in that code. So this is all the M language. This is all the M language, and what this is going to do is it's going to create this little rudimentary date table that's going to work fine, just fine for us. All I do is paste it in the M code here and hit done, and voila. We have a parameterized way to create a date table. So what kind of dates do I want? So I'm just going to put something in here. So let's say I want a date table from let's say Jan 1, 2000 until 12/31. Let's go 2020. Why not? I'm going to invoke this by hitting the invoke button, and now I have my date table. I'm going to call this table date. We have this nice little date table that we can utilize for our report. So this has dates all the way from Jan 1, 2000 to December 31, 2020. That's a lot of rows, there's a lot of dates, but we need it for this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit close and apply because this data, I know this is already good to go. It's ready to rock and roll. I'm going to hit close and apply. And what we're going to see is the date table actually populate here in our data model. All right, so you might not see it right now, but sometimes it kind of goes to the side. Sometimes you have to zoom out to kind of see all your stuff. You can hold control and zoom your mouse wheel to kind of move some stuff around. All right, so we have this date table and we have this failed banks table, right? So we have those. All right, so let's say now any reporting that you do that utilizes dates, you always want to use your date table. You always want to use your date table because it's more dynamic, it has more slicing capabilities and whatnot. So in my date table, let's look at the state and count of banks by year. Let's do that. So I'm going to grab year from my date table, load it into this visualized table here, and we have now a year, a state, and a count of banks. Well, something doesn't look quite right, right, everybody? Something does not look right. So for the state of Georgia, it's saying that every single year there's been 93 failed banks. Well, what does it say again without this year column in it? Oh, 93, 93, 93, 93 for Georgia. So I'm going to give you guys a pro tip. All right, this is a pro tip. This is super important. This is an issue that comes up with literally everyone ever that's used Power BI, okay? If you're just starting Power BI, you will run into this problem eventually, where you see repeating values that don't make sense, okay? So check this out. Let me load this back to our table. These repeating values don't make sense. So Georgia is saying there's 93 closed banks for every year when we know they've only had 93 closed banks. Here's the tip, whenever you see repeating values, that means you have a relationship problem in Power BI. All right, what that means is there's either no relationship in place. Do you guys see a relationship? I don't. There's no relationship here. There's either no relationship in place, the relationship is wrong, or the relationship isn't behaving as you think it would. All right, but if you ever see those repeating values that don't make sense, you always have a relationship problem. That's just how it is. That's the rule. It's like, Nick's law of Power BI, if that's what you want to call it. All right, if you ever see those repeating values, it's a relationship problem. I promise you. So let's build a relationship real quick. So I could drag and drop, but for those of you who are new to this, let me show you the formal way of doing it. From here, I can hit this Manage Relationships button at the top. I can hit that button. This opens up the Manage Relationship window. It says there's no relationships. I can hit New. So let's build a relationship between the date table and the failed banks table. Because this is a date dimension, we want to relate it based on the date column. So I'm going to relate this from the date column in the date table and the closing date column in the failed banks table. All right, and I'm going to hit OK. So now I have a relationship in place. When I hit close, you'll see this line will appear. It's saying, all right, the date dimension can now filter the failed banks fact in this case. Failed banks is our fact here. So our date dimension is filtering our failed banks fact. And if I look at my report, and year is in here, and there's more issues. This is another issue that happens all the time. Now the year column is blank. Now that doesn't make much sense now, does it? So the year column is blank for a reason. The reason being is because this date table, when we loaded it, it didn't, Power BI a lot of times does a great job. It's still a text value here. It didn't actually make it a date value. So what I could do is I could go to this data type button at the top and switch it to a date value. I'm going to hit yes. All right, so now this date column is a date. And now we have a little bit more accurate information. All right, so let's look at Georgia now. Let's find Georgia. So now our Georgia is giving us some proper information. 2002, they had one field bank. 2007, 1, 5, 25, 21, 23, blah, blah, blah. If you wanted to bust out a calculator, you're more than welcome to, but I can promise you that all of these will tally out to that 93 value we're looking for. And if we wanted to add all these Georgia ones up together. All right, so now we have this date table in place, and now we could do some more things with it as well. Just like this is about ETL process and the importance of that, so I'm not gonna deep dive into DAX and doing time intelligence and stuff like that. There's other webinars for stuff like that, but this is how you load a good date table in there. You can make one from scratch, or you can load one that's already been pre-made, or you can load one from a database. All right, so the next thing is, all right, let's fix our ambiguity problem at the state level. Well, there's a few ways we could accomplish this. The easy way for this example is if we went into transform data, added a column that just said USA or United States, and then merged it together, like, state, comma, United States, and it would work. But that's the easy way. We don't do things the easy way. We do things the right way. All right? We do things the right way. So let me pull up here. I have state abbreviations, Wikipedia. So I have this list of US state abbreviations. So it's got all kinds of stuff on here. It's got flags, it's got the abbreviation values on here. It's got everything that we need. So if I remember correctly, I could take this Wikipedia link and go into Power BI query editor, and if I go to new source web, let's see if we can load this as a table. Yep, anonymous. Come on, let's go. Let's see if we can find it here. Oh, this looks good. Oh, yeah. All right, so this code's an abbreviations table. I can hit OK. Let's load this into Power BI. Let's slice and dice this baby up. All right, so what we're going to do is we want a few columns out of here. We want this column 4 has all of our state abbreviations in it that we want. This column 1 has actually our full state names that we want. So what we could do is utilize this and bring it into our failed banks table and use this. We could transform this in such a way that we're actually be, we could like dynamically put the proper state name with the failed banks. All right. So first off, let's get this kind of formatted correctly. So I'm gonna promote the headers up quite a bit. So let me just see some values here real quick. Make sure there's nothing crazy. Everything looks good. Okay. All right. So I'm going to hit the promote headers button. So which is use first row as headers. It's located in a few different spots, but I'm just going to use this one right here. So I'm going to hit use first row as headers. Let's promote those headers up. Let's do it again. And let's do it. Wait, hold on. Let me look at that. Yeah. All right. Let's do it again. And one more time. There we go. Now I'm going to get rid of any columns I don't want. I could go remove columns manually if I wanted to. I'm going to show you guys another way. This choose columns button at the top is really nice. I only want a couple columns out of here. So if I hit choose columns, I want this column called United States of America. We're going to rename these columns in a second. I want this column called US because it has my abbreviations in there. And let's see. Oh, you know what? Let's bring this one that's called U.S. because it has some like short names. Maybe we want those at some point. I don't know. You never know. So I'm going to hit OK on these three. Now we have those three columns left. And then we're going to call this state. I'm going to call this abbreviation one state abbreviation. And I'm going to call this one state short. You never know if you might want it. I'm going to name this query states. Oops. Cancel. States. So what are we going to do with this? We could load this. We could build a relationship. It's going to work okay. What I would rather do is merge this into our failed banks table. That way our failed banks table has our full state name rather than just an abbreviation. All right, so let's do that. So this is a merge. We're going to use a inner join merge because we only care about the types of states where we have data for. All right. So if you ever do an inner join, if you don't know what an inner join is, it's where matching rows. So for instance, if no banks ever closed in the state of Utah, for instance, it's not, there's no, Utah wouldn't exist in the state column. Therefore, it's not going to pull in the Utah state abbreviation because there's no match. That's called an inner join, only where things match. Okay. So if you ever do this on a query and then this failed banks data updates where it says, all right, now we have a row for Utah, it's going to dynamically pull in that merge with Utah as a state from the other table. Everything's dynamic on a data refresh. That's how it works. So you don't have to be afraid of, oh, what if something new happens later, blah, blah, blah. It does dynamically work. That's how the query editor works. It works really, really well here for our ETL. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go up here to this merge queries button. I'm going to select it. And then I'm going to choose, all right, I have the failed banks table selected right here at the top. So that's our core table that we're going to be utilizing here. And we are going to merge it with the states table. All right, now join kind. What kind of join do we want to do? We already talked about this. We want to do an inner join. All right, inner join. So inner join only where matching rows. So what is this key column? I'm going to call it a key column, though that's not the actual name. Don't confuse key columns like relationships and stuff like that. But what key column we're going to use the basis merge off of is the last thing we have to do. Well, where this state abbreviation column matches this state abbreviation column, I'm going to hit ignore because it's all free data for everyone. I'm going to match these two together. we're going to merge based off of that. So wherever it says WV, we're gonna add a column that says West Virginia. Wherever it says NJ, we're gonna add a column that says New Jersey, based off of this state abbreviation column. So I'm gonna hit OK. So now something happens that you probably didn't expect. What you didn't expect is one singular column to get added. This is how a merge works. So when you merge tables together, you have a choice of which columns you want to pull in. So you know how we removed a bunch of columns earlier? Technically, we didn't need to, but it's better to, get things prepared so it makes things easier for you in the future. You could do it either way. My way, where I remove those columns ahead of time, I would call it best practice, because you can always reference this table independently later, this dates table. All right, so if I click on this little button here, it's called expand. If I hit this expand button, I could choose which columns I want to return. I can return the state column, which has the full state name, which is good. I can return the state abbreviation column. Well, I already have one of those, don't I? This one right here, I already have it. So I'm going to uncheck this box, and we're going to bring the state short column for fun, because why not? All right, I'm going to uncheck this box as use original column name as prefix. How that works is it uses like this column name as a prefix if you're trying to keep track of which columns are brought in. So it would say states.state, states.state short. We don't need it because we know where it's coming from, but there are some business cases where you would want to check that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And now we have our full state names. We have our full state names. So I'm going to rename this one. There was already a column here called state. That's why it's called state.1. I'm just going to rename this previous column to state abbreviation, and then rename this one to state. And now we have our merged table in here. It looks all great and fine and dandy, right? Looks awesome. So now if I hit close and apply, going to load these. It's going to make those modifications in here. I don't know what that error is about. I'm just going to ignore it for now. If I choose my map, and then instead of location being state abbreviation, now we're going to use, what's happening? Something's broken. Copy details. I don't know what the issue is. All right, what if I did this? No. Let me just save this real quick and see if we reopen it. I don't know what that error is about. Desktop. Oops. What's happening here? Okay. Oh, it loaded in report server. That's fine. I don't really care. All right. So if I open up that map, okay, now it's working. All right. Now if I use the state column as location, and then we use our count of banks measure as size, we get a lot more accurate information now. There's nothing popping up over here in Brazil. We're looking pretty good there. So there is still technically an ambiguity issue that could happen here, which in this case could be from United States. If there's another state that exists in the world, you could potentially run into issues. So again, we'd pull in the United States column from the Wikipedia table that we did before, the country column. So, and that's one way to look at it. Well, what if we wanted to do this a different way? So what if we didn't want to merge those together? What if we didn't want to merge those two tables together? Well, what we could do is we could come at this a different direction. We can come about this a different direction, okay? So let me go back to the names of the ribbons up here might be a little differently, might be different than before because it opened in report server. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm not going to harp on it. and reconnect to this data. All right, so let me kill some of these steps. So remember how we merged these steps in? I'm going to kill some of those merged steps, and we're back to where we were. All right, this is how our data was before, right? And we still have our states table that exists over here. You see? So we still have this states table that exists, and now we're back to how we were before. We didn't merge those processes together. We didn't merge those queries together. All right, so if I hit close and apply now, all right, so if we're looking here, the state column is now the abbreviation column like it was before. I'm going to rename it to state abbreviation. There we go. But now we also have this states table in our data model. What I could do is instead of merging these tables together, I can use state as a dimension. I can use state as a dimension on failed banks. So how we created a relationship before is we opened up the relationship, manage relationships window. We built the relationship from scratch. So if I go to state abbreviation and relate it to state abbreviation, because one of the columns must have unique values. Oh, because of the same. No? Let's see. Let me just double check this real quick. I was just trying to show you guys a little bonus way to look at it. Oh, it's the blank values that are messing it up. Let me double check this real quick. State, abbreviation, are there any blanks? There are. Let me get rid of blanks. So what I did, so I was trying to relate the two tables together, but one of the tables didn't have completely unique values. It had a blank. And whenever there's a blank, each blank is its own value. And this table had multiple blanks in it. So I'm just getting rid of the blanks that exist here in the states table because those aren't relevant to our data set that we're looking at here. We don't care about counting banks on states that don't exist or states that weren't accounted for. There we go. So now back in a relationship editor, I am going to relate state abbreviations to state abbreviation. Notice how we have another relationship in place here. Our states dimension could filter down our failed banks table. And now, instead of using state abbreviation, I could go into our states table, grab the full state column, and use it and work here as well. The relationship has to be in place for this to work properly, but it is working. I could do it here in our table as well. Not state abbreviation, state. So these changes that we make in the query editor on our ETL process with our dimensions, like this one. So now I could come back here and come back and modify some of the stuff I did. Remember how we removed a bunch of columns? Where I could actually access the removed other column step by double clicking on it or hitting this little gear. And I'm like, oh, well, you know what? Maybe I do want a column that has the state the country name in it. Just hypothetically speaking. Let me see if I can find it. It is. Oh, it doesn't exist here because it's all U.S. states. But you can always go back in time, modify some things, go back forward in time, and then it would populate. So let's say there is so it looks like there is an ID column for each state that exists. How does it work? It goes 0 to 55. So there's some values in here that are, oh, there's like 3 is missing. That's weird. I'm not super familiar with this Wikipedia data set. But anyways, you can go back in here and modify some steps, hit close and apply. It's going to dynamically work. So now our states table can filter down our banks table, but not the other way. You see how this relationship works? See how it's a one way? This arrow is indicative saying this is how the filtering works in this direction. Filtering works in this direction. So we're always filtering down our fact. We're always filtering down our metrics by our dimensions. but that's, like I said, that's another topic. But this topic is about the ETL process, all these transformations, business rules, and whatnot that we can apply. But anyways, so there's tons more. I could literally talk about this for hours and hours and hours. I could literally talk about this for days, days, and days. But unfortunately, we are getting at that point now where we are tight on time. Again, just so everyone knows, please feel free to follow my blog. It's backtosql.wordpress.com. Follow my Twitter at backtosql. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Nick Lee. I'm the only Nick Lee in the world, so it's easy to find me on LinkedIn. I'm being a little sarcastic if you can't tell. Add me there. Feel free to email me if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you want help with anything. I'm always available to help when I can. It was a real pleasure talking about this with you guys. This is a topic that I don't know if you could tell, but I really, really love. And this is, huge. So, I would like to thank everybody for attending, and I will hand this back over to Crystal.
All right, thanks so much, Nick. And like Nick was saying, this will be recorded. You guys will receive the recording tomorrow around noon in your email box. If you guys have any questions about our DBA managed services or our remote offerings, please feel free to reach out to myself. I'll be glad to help with you guys. I can put the link down here in the chat for both of those. I hope you guys have a good rest of your Tuesday. Stay safe. And Nick, thank you so much for hosting me. Greatly appreciate it.
Problem, it was a pleasure.
All right.